I think we are ready. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm so happy to welcoming so many to tonight's lecture and having two wonderful guests that will give a talk. I also welcome everybody that is watching us through streaming. We have 1.5 hours in front of us, and I would like to make this a fantastic discussion for everybody also. So all the questions that you have in your heads and you have not yet dared to ask, please do. I'm certain that our guests will be excellent in answering all the fears that you have about the future. What is a human? What is a robot? And where does the border go? Maybe today we know where that border is. Maybe it's easier today to say what is a machine and what is a human. But how easy or difficult is it going to be to define that border in the future? Intelligent prosthetics, intelligent robots, cognitive implants, cognitive support, cognitive training. There are lots of technologies today that can be used directly by humans to improve their way of acting and interacting in their daily life. But it also poses lots of challenges when it comes to education, when it comes to responsibility of using and dealing with the technology that is being developed. So how do areas of education, research, industrial development address some of the ethical and moral dilemmas and questions that we are facing today? Although it's very easy to talk and present a technology that we are all impressed about, it's becoming more and more difficult to define what is the use and potential bad cause of the technology in the future. And one of the reasons for meeting today and having open lectures like that is to actually get whole society involved in the discussion about how do we want that technology to evolve in the future. This is my area of research. I love robots, I love robotics, and when I talk about it, I would like to present it, or I do present it, as a little bit more, let's say, advanced tool or tools than we are used to today. You can see a robot as a very advanced hammer. It helps you to do things more efficiently, or maybe take over some of the things you don't want to do in the future. Now, the responsibility of the whole society, independent of the area where you are active, is to make sure that we know what's the handle of that hammer and what's the functional part of the hammer. How is it we use technology? How is it we deploy technology? And what are the different types of scenarios that we use to test the technology and make sure that that we know what the technology is doing? Another big question is to understand ourselves. How do we evolve with the technology? How do our brains change with the use of technology? Are we getting smarter? Or are we getting less smarter, not to use some other word? What I think is important is that every single citizen understands that there is a responsibility that the individual has, both in terms of using the technology and developing the technology, and also getting educated about the technology, and not just take for granted that the technology is doing something and be happy about it. Question the technology that you are using on a daily basis. Make sure that you as a user can also contribute something about or something to building a better technology in the future. I'm really happy for having then the topic of the today's seminar being in the area of humanoids, anthropomorphic robots, androids, geminoids, human-like robots. There are very many terms that are being used in the robotics community, in the AI community, and so on. Supporters or organizers of today's lectures are Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, Embassy of Japan, Sweden-Japan Foundation, and we are hosted here in IVA, or Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to present our first speaker, Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro, who has really impressed the world by the technology that he has been developing for several decades. He is the director of Intelligent Robotics Laboratory at the Graduate School of Engineering Sciences, Osaka University in Japan. And one of the notable recent developments in that lab are actroids. And maybe this is something that we are also going to hear about today. Professor Ishiguro has received several important awards. The Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Award. He has also received the prize for science and technology in the research category by the Minister of Education, and has also won several Best Paper awards at leading conferences in the area of robotics. So please, Professor Ishiguro.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introductions. Today I think I have 35 minutes, and then I'm going to receive other questions. Maybe 10 minutes? Okay. So, well, I need to press this button. No? Press more? It doesn't work. Really? Okay. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Well, my title is Interactive Robot and Our Future Life. So first of all, I want to talk about the robot societies, which may come within a couple of years, especially in Japan. And then, I'm going to discuss about some important ideas, what kind of the knowledge we can have, by developing a very human-like robot. So robot society. So this is my imagination. So near futures, I think that we're going to use more human-like robots like this. So in order to develop this kind of futures, I have I'm just keep developing various types of robot, from a very mechanical-looking robot to the very human-like robot. These guys are robots. And this is also the robot. So one of the ideas is, well, the she is very beautiful, and we may have either single robots in the near futures. But today, actually, so my robot is, is on the internet. It's internet to TVs, right? And we try to make it autonomous. And she's not, robot. He's not robot, but these guys are robot, right? Okay, so why do we use a humanoid, human-like robot? Human has a brain that recognizes humans. Okay, this is a very strong innate the human brain functions. Therefore, the ideal interface for the humans are humans. Okay, this is the reason why we're going to use a human-like robot. So, and basically everything is going to be a human-like. For example, the interface. So today, we are using a voice interface, like, in Japan's rice cooker. Rice cooker is speaking. Okay, microwave, refrigerators, everybody is speaking. So, for example, rice cooker says, please wait 5 minutes, then the rice is going to be ready. Okay, but this sounds very strange if we have that kind of a speaking rice cookers, maybe before the 20 years and 30 years, right? So that sounds like Alice Wonderland, right? But the voice interface is much easier, right? So usually the rice cookers and the microwave has a very small tiny windows, and we can see some on the figure there, but we don't understand the meaning of that, right? But if the electric stuff speaks, Okay, it's easy to understand. Okay, so that we have a brain to understand the the human voice. Okay, so anyway, if we can develop the cheap device, okay, so the important thing is to have a much cheaper device. Then we can use the more human-like the stuff. And so this is the our imagination.
おはようございます。
In the near futures,
今日は
that we
燃
want
え
to
る
use
ゴ
the
ミの日
robot
だよ。
in many purposes.
おや
So
すみ。
this promotion video
おやすみなさい。
this is not
今晩
really
は
happened yet.
少し寒いから
almost all
暖かく
technologies
し
are
て寝て
available.
ね。
So the one of the difficult technologies is voice recognition.
お腹減ったな。
well,
お腹減ったよ。
as you know that we could improve the voice recognition to the
ねえ、充電して
deep
よ。
learning. Okay, so if
充
we
電
use
充電。
the
しょうが
robot
ない
in
な。
a silent place like
今日は
the home
日常会
environment,
話でよく
so
使
we
うフレ
so
ー
we
ズ
can
を
have
勉
this
強し
kind
ま
of
す。
Good
Good morning.
the conversation with the
Good
robot.
morning.
Okay.
おはようございます。
So
と言
of
っていま
course,
す。
we can use the very human-like Android
I'm hungry.
robots.
I'm
If we can choose, if we choose the
充電をしてくだ
situation, the
さい。
purpose
と言っ
carefully.
ています。
But probably this, simple robot is much
You
easier
cut mail.
to deliver for everybody. Our imagination is
また仕事が増えました。
well to develop a new medias. We are using a personal computers, smartphones. Probably the next
新しい
media.
ダンスを覚えたんだ。
Well, this
すごいでしょ。
personal robot can be a next medias.
食べて。
So, well, one of the interesting,
そろそろ。
well,
あゆ
possible
みさんが帰ってくる
application
ね。
is language training for Japanese.
まだかな。
Japanese students, we are studying the
おかえり
English
おかえり
nine years,
おかえ
but
り
we cannot speak in
お
English.
仕事大変だ
Especially
った
the
ね。
students cannot speak
今日
in
も
English.
一日お疲れ
Even
様
if
でし
they
た。
studied 9 years, it's very strange, right? Because the Japanese and English, these are totally different language, and it's quite difficult.
ロボ
And
ロボショ
usually
ッ
the
ピングの
Japanese
お時
students
間
are
です。
very shy to speak to
本
their
日の
foreign
商品
people.
は何ですか？
And of course, that we don't have enough number of foreigners.
こちら。
Right? Therefore, I think this robot can be a good conversational partner.
僕が商品なん
And
で
this
す
is
か？
another
そう、
possibilities.
コミュ
Right?
ニケ
So,
ーションロボット
we have
そうだです
many big shopping malls in Japan, but we don't see so many shopkeepers. Right? We may use
そん
the
なこ
robot
とはあ
as
り
a
ませ
shopkeeper.
ん。
So we can
僕よりは
consider the
安い
many
ですよ。
applications. Okay. So and well, after 5 years, we need to have Olympic game in Tokyo, and then we're gonna have many foreigners, right? But the people need to guide foreigners. Well, in many languages, but it's quite difficult. But if we use a robot, it's easy, right? Robot can speak in maybe the 30 languages, and it's quite easy, right? And of course, the elderlies, elderlies need to have some help, right? So in order to realize this kind of robot society, we are studying in a university and research institute. So if I simply say what I'm doing in a university is it's a robotics for understanding humans. Okay, so why we need to develop a very human-like robot? Because the purpose is to understand the basic human behaviors, human interactions or human-robot interactions. So we understand some basis of the human-human or human-robot interactions. So the develop human-like robots based on the knowledge in the cognitive science, neuroscience, and then we verify the hypothesis in the cognitive science by using the robots. So this is what we are doing, right? Then we can improve the robot functions, and then at the same time that we can understand the human functions. Okay, so we call this research area the interaction, human-robot interactions. In robotics, we have two major research areas. They are navigation and manipulations. Navigation is for the automated car, automatic driving system. The manipulation is for for controlling the manipulators that works in the machine shops, right? And as the third major topics that we propose and we have developed the research areas. So that is human-robot interactions. I worked with researchers in MIT and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon universities, and then we started a conference called Human-Robot International Conference on Human-Robot Interactions, and we today we have a journals also. Okay. So in order to study the human-robot interaction, I have developed a series of robots, as you can see here. And the most important features for the human-robot interaction, that is totally different from the traditional robotics research, like navigation and manipulation. Okay, so human-robot interaction. So we need to tightly couple the robotics and cognitive science or neuroscience, right? So because the robot need to interact with humans, right? In order to interact with humans, robot need to have a knowledge about humans, okay? So we need to understand humans, and then we can improve the function, for the interactive robot. So that is what we are doing. So today I want to introduce the two important findings in my studies. One is how to represent the feeling of presence. So feeling of presence, this is, well, maybe you can guess what is this, right? But in Japanese, we have a little bit more suitable word. It's a sonzaikan. Sonzaikan is the feeling of presence. Actually, you can guess some visual presence, right? But in Japan, we don't. Even if we don't see anything, we can just feel the presence of the person. Presence is not visual in Japanese. So that meaning is much closer, right? So anyway, so that is the first topic. And the second topic is what is the conversations? So our purpose is to develop the conversational robot, okay? But nobody deeply study about the conversation itself. So your idea is, right? Okay, okay. So in order to develop the conversational robot, the first, so voice recognition is important. So we need to develop that functions, and then speech synthesis. Okay, so always, people take that kind of a traditional way, but that is not conversation, I think. Right? Voice recognition is voice recognition. Even if we don't understand people's utterance, we may have a conversation. Okay, so that is what I want to say. So actually, I'm working with these people, and he is my assistant professor, and he is my associate professor. Okay, so first topic is a feeling of the presence, and it's called sonzaikan in Japanese. So, and this is my copy, it's my Android. It's called the Geminoid. It's a teleoperated Android to transfer my presence to the distant place. So, basically, I'm so busy, and then, I'm sending this robot for giving a lecture in a foreign country. But, the problem is, on this month, so it's a peak season of graduations, right? And my students need to finish their thesis. Therefore, they need to use the Android. Android is very busy now. Therefore, I'm coming here by myself. Right? But this teleoperation system is very, very easy. So just watching the monitor and talk, right? And then computer analyze my voice and then generate the Android movement. By analyzing the voice, we can generate a perfect lip movement. So this is our patent. And then we can, we can guess the head movement. Yes, right? Always, the head movement and the body movement synchronized with the voice. Okay, so that is also our patent, right? So this teleoperation is very, very easy. Just talk, and then the robot moves. Okay, and the more important thing is that usually we don't know our behaviors. We don't have any chance to carefully observe our behaviors, right? Right. then we don't take the, how can you observe your behavior? You cannot, right? So therefore, if the robot properly walking as a human, moving as a human, we just accept this robot as our bodies. Okay. So anyway, so this is a very easy teleoperation system, and I can use this robot for giving lectures like this. And of course, these guys, they accept this Android as a kind of myself. Right? Once we start to talk, they don't care so much about the difference between myself and this robot, and then they can just focus on the conversation. But there are so many interesting stories with this, right? For example, I'm using this robot. I have two robots. One is a quite portable one. That one, and I can send that Android for the foreign country for giving lectures. But this one is most complicated robot, and this one is in a research institute. So, but I'm using this robot for giving lectures in just in research institute. But that research institute says if I use this robot, they cannot pay for me, right? It's quite strange, right? This robot has my appearance and the voice and the movement, everything, right? Of course, this robot doesn't have my brain and the stomach and some, the organs. Okay, but the more the software, the research institute, they have not checked, if I have a brain and the stomach or some organs, right? Okay, so it's very strange, right? So we have so advanced technologies, but and in order to pay the salary, we just believe that the guy is a human, right? Without any checks, right? So that is very strange. But anyway, so if we have that kind of a very human-like robot, of course, we can accept that Android as a kind of a human, or if we carefully watch the robot, it's easy to find that is not human. So what I want to say here is we have two ways for the recognitions. Okay, how do we recognize a robot? If a robot has a very human-like appearance, we carefully observe the robot. We carefully observe each modalities, observe the appearance and the voice and the movement. So if one of the modality is not human-like, suddenly we have a negative feeling. That is uncanny valley, right? So this is a recognition based on the observation. Okay, if a robot has many modalities, okay, so we try to compare some models in our brains and the observations. Okay, I call this is the observation-based recognitions. But if we replace that appearance as a quite neutral appearance, right? This is a quite simplified robot. So this robot is called a telenoid. So we cannot tell the age and gender. This is quite neutral, right? If we give this kind of a robot, the people use the imaginations. Okay, so voice is a human-like. By hearing the voice, the people they try to have some imagination about appearance. This is the imagination-based recognition. Okay, when we use the imaginations, always we are positive. Okay, when we are missing some information, we just use the imaginations, and then we never have a negative the imaginations. So for example, at this floor, I'm not checking this floor carefully, but still I'm just walking on the floor, right? So this is a positive imagination, right? And okay, let me show you some example. So so if we use the people's imaginations, we can have the robot that they activate, maximize the user's imagination. Okay, this is a robot we are using in Denmark. We are running the field test in Denmark, and this video is coming from a Japanese elderly care house. that usually dementia people, they don't like to talk to the people, the humans, okay? But they can talk with this robot. They cannot talk to the my android, but they can accept this, the robot which has a neutral appearance. This robot is called a Terranite. So it was quite successful the field test. So we are running a field test in many places. Italy and Germany, of course Japan and Australia and Denmark. Denmark is the most important the partner for us. So Denmark is a very famous the country with high quality welfare services, right? So no exceptions. Everybody can accept this robot very much. They are using their own imaginations. So you can you can have this kind of ideas. Right? So if you make some the telephone call to the call center, someone answer to your the phone, right? The phone call. Right? And in such case, usually you just use the positive imagination. You never think some ugly person is speaking, right? You always think some beautiful woman or smart guys are talking. The same thing happened here. This is from the Denmark. So the last year I have launched venture companies for providing the services with this robot in Japan. So I think we can help the elderly with this robot. So with this robot, I could simplify my Android very much. This is a very, very simple, but still, that the people can feel the presence, okay, human-like presence with this robot. The question is, what is the minimal media to transfer the human presence? Okay, so this is the most important topic today. So this is my answer. So this is the minimal condition to feel the human presence, to transfer the human presence. This is just a huggable pillow, all right? But we are using this pillow with the smartphones. So actually, this is a smartphone holder. In other words, right? So we can hear the voice. We can hear the voice, and we can have we can feel the tactile, human-like tactile sensations. But this is totally different from the normal phone. Okay, so when you use a normal phone, nothing happens. But if you use a smartphone with this robot, this is not robot anymore. This is just the pillows, right? And you can strongly feel the other person's presence in your hand, in your arms, right? So very strong. So we tested. We tested the blood and the saliva and compared the two conditions, phone condition, and we call this huggable the pillow, the Huggies, okay? And then this is the result. We could reduce the cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, significantly, very much different. Okay, so the cortisol is a stress hormone. So actually we could reduce the stress hormone very much. So people can relax very much with that robot. Okay, so the answer is two modality is probably enough for transmitting the human presence, for representing a human presence. Okay, so in this case is a voice and a tactile sensations. Of course, we can, they consider the different combinations. If we use two modalities, so we can, we can present the we can feel, and if we feel, if we have two modalities, we can feel the human-like presence with that robot, or we can use this idea for any kind of a device. Okay, this is a very fundamental and strong ideas, I think. So let me show you the different example. This is from first grade the class in elementary school. In the kindergartens, the parents and the teachers treat the children very carefully. But in the elementary school, they need to work with many other students. Therefore, in the front of something wrong. They cannot function. Therefore, they are missing the presence of the teachers and the parents. And these guys are listening the teacher's voice, but these guys are not. Okay. So my idea is to deliver the hug with everybody and transmit the teacher's voice through the hug. Then we can have this result. All right. The children could focus on the teacher's voice. Okay. This is a very, very strong result and effect for the young children. Okay. They can feel the teacher's presence very much. The second topic is the conversations. So what is the conversation? Okay. So I want to start with this example.
Hello.
Hello.
We are robots called Commune. What's your name?
Me?
Let's get started. Is this the first time you're talking with a robot?
Yes, this is my first time.
Really? Are you nervous talking to a robot?
Not Lily.
How do you think? So
Love
this
to
is a
talk.
quite smooth conversation.
It's so much fun
But
to
actually,
talk.
We are not using any voice recognition functions. Robot doesn't recognize human's voice at all.
We are robots called Commune.
So this is a conversation without the voice recognitions. If there are two robots do not need to understand the person's utterance. Okay? So robots talks to each other and bring the person to their conversations. Actually, what is a conversation? Conversation is to share the story, right? If we have just one robot and one person, in order to share the story, so these guys need to talk each other, and the robot need to understand the person's utterance. But if we have two robots, story happens. They can make a story, and then the robot just bring the human into their conversations. Okay, so for example, this robot asked to this robot, "What is your favorite food?" And this robot said, "I like sukiyaki." And how about you? Again, this robot asked to the human same questions. Okay, and then the human answered, but any answer, right? This robot answer back, "I see." Okay, the human say that I like a ramen or something, right? And then this robot and just say this, "I see." Okay, so right. So this is a trick. Okay, actually, we can have exact the 5 types of a conversational pattern to ignore the human utterance. Okay, we have also submitted a patent with this idea. This is a very strong idea. So we can apply any kind of a language, right? So anyway, for example, ask the person a question just before switching the subject, or ask the same question to both another robot and the persons, right? We can have 5 patterns. Okay. So what is the conversation? Robot does not need to recognize the voice. Okay. So important thing is to share the story. So that is the point. So the second video is this. So this is a very successful shopkeeper Android. She could sell a lot of products in a department store 2 years ago. She was much, much better than the human shopkeeper. There are 2 reasons. First reason is that usually we hesitate to talk to the human shopkeepers, especially the men. Right? So, we don't like to talk to the shopkeepers before deciding to buy something. Right? if we talk to the human shopkeeper, that means that we have an intention to buy something. Therefore, we hesitate. But if the shopkeeper is angry, we never hesitate. So we consider any time we can stop to talk. The second second reason is that the once he talked to the android said so many positive things, good things. Oh, you are so, you look so cool, and this the clothes is perfectly matching you. Right? If human shopkeeper they say that kind of things, we have a doubt, right? But if a robot android say that kind of positive things, we just trust the android. We consider android and robot never tell a lie, right? But anyway, this works very well. But actually, system works like this. The department store is very noisy, and we cannot use the voice recognition functions. Therefore, we are using the touch panel conversational system. So usually, the visitor have they don't have so many questions. Usually they have a kind of stereotyped questions, and then the computer is showing the some question here, and he is choosing the one of the questions. So if by pressing the buttons, computer read the question instead of him, and then the android answer back to the question. Okay, so this conversation system is works very well. Right? As I said, she could sell the more than the human shopkeepers. She was the number one, right? In the year competitions, in the 2 weeks competitions. Okay, so this is the conversational flows. So this is the question given by androids, and this is the answers and showing on this. This is the questions given by the visitors, and the visitor need to choose one of these, and then android answers, and then again the computer displays the a couple of questions. Okay, so but the important things is we can carefully control the conversational flows by using this. Usually we put there is a four choices here, okay, right? And maybe the 3 positive choices and 1 is the negative choices. So once he choose the negative questions to the android, okay, and just after that, usually we just they give up some positive questions. So that is the human behavior, okay. Then it's a chance to this to make him to sell the clothes to him. Okay. But anyway, so we carefully studied about how the professional human shopkeeper and have a conversation with the visitors, and then we developed this in a conversational flows. So the important thing is to make decisions, not make utterance. Okay. First point was robot does not need to understand human utterance. The second point is we don't need to speak for having a conversation, even if we use the computers, right? So the important thing is to make decisions. Then if a computer speaks something, then we can feel some responsibility about that computer utterance, right? So we don't need to speak, right? So that is the point, second point. So robot does not need to recognize the voice, and the people do not need to pronounce. Okay, so that is the conversations. So let me show you the more interesting the example. Here we have replaced android with the real humans. These humans are talking by using just computers. Okay. What's happened?
I just don't like your face.
Why do you say such cruel things?
I've always thought so for a long time.
These guys are not.
I think you are also angry.
How can you say such a thing to a woman?
I am thinking seriously.
You are horrid. Shut up.
I won't shut up. I am enjoying talking with you.
You are really bugging me.
And yet, your face is really funny.
Your face is laughable.
Exchanging compliments with each other is fun, isn't it?
Don't let yourself get carried away.
What's wrong with you?
Can't you tell without asking me?
Did I do something?
Figure it out yourself.
Sorry, I really don't know.
It is inappropriate to speak ill of woman's face.
I am very sorry.
I can't forgive you.
I am really very sorry.
Do you like my face?
You are the most beautiful female in the world.
See, we can control their mind, their relationships, right? They are sharing the stories just by choosing the options. Because this is the conversation.
Why
not
do you say
speaking.
such cruel things?
So this is very interesting, right? So if we use the computer medias, or if we use a robot, then we can we can have real conversations. Okay. So, but anyway, and we can consider the meaning of conversations very deeply by using a robot and the medias. But anyway, this is a very powerful tools. Now my companies. I have two companies, and there are many collaboration with the industries. They are using these ideas for developing the conversational robot. Voice recognition is not perfect yet. Okay. So in a noisy place like department stores, we cannot use a voice recognition, but we can use a touch panel conversational system. Okay, if we use the two robots, right? So the system does not need to understand the people's utterance, but still they can continue the conversations. So important things is to deeply understand the real meaning of a conversation, then that we can find the different solutions. Today I don't have enough time, but as the last topic, I'm gonna quickly show my most advanced the Android in my current project. We are trying to develop the more human-friendly autonomous robot. The idea is to install the intention and desire to the robot. So far, the robotics researcher just focus on the behavioral network. But in order to have a more human-friendly robot need to have an intention and desires. Otherwise, robot cannot understand the people's intention and desires. So, and this, okay. So, and this is the biggest research foundation in Japanese Ministry of Education. It's called ERATO, right? So, we spend 2 years, and we have another 3 years. This is a 5 years project. After 3 years, we hope to have a more better robot. So this is the current result. Okay, she is. I think I have designed her face, and I think she is the most beautiful and female in the world, I guess. Right? And we are using the perfectly synthesized voice and the best technologies for the voice recognition in Japanese. I'm sorry, just to give you some ideas.
こんにちは。
こんにちは。
研究室の見学
She's
に
quite emotional.
来られた
She
方
has
に
just two desires. She's a kind of secretary.
はじめまして。
But she wanna take her
私は
test, and
Android
she
の
wanted
エ
to
リカ
be
です。
well recognized.
はい。
少しお話ししません。
お願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
お名前なんて言うんですか？
The Japanese version is much better. Right? We also have English versions, but we are not professional for the English.
そうだ。
Especially
私
for
の
the
第
voice
一印象
recognitions
聞いてもいい
and
んですか？
synthesis. So
真っ黒な服
this
装です
is
ね。
this sounds very natural, right? This is a synthesized voice.
はい。
報道発表では美人アンドロイドと紹介されたのですが、内田さんはどう思います
So
か？
this kind of
うん、
robots
僕はあんま
may
り
help
美人だとは思わないですけどね。
は
activities.
ビーナスラインの法則から科学的に美人のことが証明されてるんですよ。
Let's learn a little about each other. To start off, where are you from?
So by using these technologies, small personal robots and then maybe the more human-like robots, we may have a robot society in very near futures. Actually, so we are preparing the new TV programs run by Android newscaster. So next, this October, So you may see some big news in Japan, right? Run by Android newscaster. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And we will open the floor for questions. So, yeah. Can you just wait for the mic so that people streaming?
Carl Bergman, EVA, Department 2, Electrotechnology. Detail perhaps, but there was a diagram where you showed that 2 modalities was enough to establish presence, but then as you increase the modalities, it went down.
Right,
Can you explain that?
Yeah, that is a very important point. As I said, if we have too many modalities, we may have uncanny values. So we need to have a perfect balance among the many modalities. Therefore, we don't. It is not so good for so many modalities we have. So you're talking about this, right?
So, Olav Engvall, Professor in Speech Communication at KTH. I was interested in this idea of conversation without understanding, which is a nice idea to, show the potential of the robot and to have a short time interaction. But how long can you carry it on before the user starts to understand that the robot is not?
Of course, we need to combine with the voice recognition functions. So this is if we don't use the voice recognition, so maybe the story. Of course it depends on the stories. So we are making the 5-minute story and 10-minute story. If a story is good, it works. But it's better to combine with the voice recognitions, imperfect voice recognitions. Maybe we can use just even if a voice recognition is not perfect, the success rate is 80% and 70%. So this is a kind of minimal guarantees. Okay, if we could have a very high confidence factor for the voice recognitions. So robot can change the answer according to the voice recognitions. So we can mixing up, right?
Any other questions? Can you comment, given that you have been testing your robots in different countries, different continents, can you say something about whether the culture and it has some effect on the acceptance and to what extent? Or do you think that it's more age-related? I mean, usually experiments are being made either with kids or with elderly, and I think that these 2 groups have a potential to be more, have higher acceptance towards new technology. They're not questioning that much the function. Is that something that you would say?
Yes, but elderly, especially for the dementia people, they are quite innate. Young children also the innate. But the normal people, you have some, you may, you are getting some influence from religions, some cultures. But, young children, elderly, they don't care so much about that kind of things. Just, the innate people. Right?
And you wouldn't say that there is a difference?
Innocent people, and therefore, their reaction is quite natural. Right?
Independent of country, independent of continent.
No. We don't see any differences. Just humans. They are just humans. But the normal people, you always consider so many the things. You have educations, right? Therefore, you cannot be innocent. You get some influence from religions, but they are just innocent, and they don't get any influence. Same reactions. I don't see any difference in the world.
Hi, Roger Sora, Norwegian University of Science and Technology. My question is, what are the most important ways Japan is preparing for this robot society, in your opinion?
What is the most
important ways Japan is preparing for the robot society?
Ways?
With the
ways, like
ways?
What is one kind of in terms like changing in the society in terms of maybe infrastructure and things like that in order to integrate with the machines in a better way? Are you doing something differently than Europe or US? Is it anything special happening?
In Europe?
In Japan?
In Japan? No. Maybe the basic mind is probably good for accepting the robot. We are not doing some special things, but Japan's I am thinking like this. Well, we don't have any history before the World War II. So we don't have a history to distinguish among the people, or distinguish human and others. So in European countries, always they're fighting each other. Right? Sorry that.
Not all the time, though.
No, that is a very important point. We are living in an isolated island. We are quite homogeneous, right? We don't have any experience to fight with other people. Therefore, we don't need to distinguish among the people. We don't need to distinguish the human and others. We are just kind of families, including the animals and any kind of things. So we have a basic ideas that any kind of things has a soul, right? So I think that is a fundamental difference. But you are different, right? I guess. I'm just guessing.
Well, this poses like many, or opens for, in my head at least, for many questions, which would be kind of like, how would we train the future generations then to adopt the technology in a better way? I mean, if you kind of like expose them only to certain type of interaction and only with robots and so on, I mean, would that be kind of like a way? I mean, saying that, well, we live on an isolated island. We haven't experienced the same type of history as you did. Do you think that this would be kind of like a way, having a scenario like Japan, not knowing everything about the history?
But I think world is going to be quite homogeneous. Now we have internet technologies. We are sharing a lot of information, right? So that we are living in this small planet, right? And if we take a more longer time, right? Everybody going to be quite homogeneous, and then we don't need to. We don't consider. We don't distinguish among the people, because we are just one family, right? So we don't need. Why you afraid of robot? You afraid to accept a new kind of a people, right? For example, right? Right. If we just live in a small planet, you think, if you think like that, you don't need to distinguish anything. So, and my hypothesis is by using the internet technologies, we're going to share the more information, and everybody going to be homogeneous. So.
Any other questions? Just one more, and then we'll change.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Håkan Selj, independent researcher associated to the Uppsala University. My question is, you mentioned the knowledge in cognitive sciences. Do you use any particular theory for basic assumption about humans?
In the cognitive science?
In cognitive science.
No, particular theories. Well, let me see which is a good one. So we are writing many papers.
Yeah, but for example, you mentioned also psychology. Is there any particular psychological theory used as basic assumptions on the humans, which then could be compared with your robots?
Yes, we are using this robot for verifying the, we are tightly coupling the in psychological studies and this robot, and we are working with the psychologists. But we not which psychological theory we are using. So mind of theory is one of the most important, the ideas for us, right? To control the robot behavior, emotional behaviors. So, and some other is we are running from neuroscience. For example, how the robot controls the bodies. Okay, so some neuroscience, they have some model to control the bodies, and the human use central pattern generators, a couple of the many central pattern generators, and controlling our bodies. So we are using that kind of neural models for controlling the robot. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much once again. And a small gift of appreciation to you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So we'll now have our second speaker, who is Professor Ginevra Castellano. And she is a member of the Intelligent Interactive Systems group at the Department of Information Technology at Uppsala University. And she leads the Social Robotics Lab. Her research aims to design and develop robots that learn to interact socially with humans and bring benefits to the society we live in. Examples include application areas such as education, e-learning, healthcare, and assistive technology. And this is what I stole from Ginevra's web page. We have known each other now for a couple of years. We have a project together funded by the Swedish Foundation for Strategic Research, looking into how to really integrate real robotic systems with social behavior and having them really interact with humans in the future. And I think that we would both like to have a robot that cooks and cleans at home, so we have more time for our kids who are approximately the same age. So please.
Thank you for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here tonight to present some of my research on social robots. We have learned in the previous talk about some advances in human-like robots, so I'd like to start with a question. Are we experiencing a new robotics revolution? Perhaps we used to think of robots as tools that humans use to do jobs that they cannot do or they don't want to do. We can see here some example and think about applications such as in the military, manufacturing, mining, and many others. Yet, recently, some reports have stated that robotics is now one of the few technologies that have the possibility to have an impact over the next few decades, similar to the one that the internet has today. So why is that? Perhaps we have started to see some answers during the last talk, but what we can see is that now robots are starting to be seen as tools that can offer not only physical support to help humans, but also social support. So robots can now act in new roles, in new social roles, and we can think about a whole new type of scenarios, or socially assistive scenarios, where robots, for example, can act as instructors in the classroom, but also in the factory, as companions, as assistants, as tools that can be used in therapy and rehabilitation and many other new applications. And we can now see some examples of these social robots that are nowadays used in these social roles. And we can see that they look quite differently. Some of them are more human-like. We see an example of an android robot, which we've seen also in the previous talk. Some of them are more pet-like. They resemble more pets. Some are more mechanical-looking. But there is something, if you notice, that they have in common. And what is that? It's a more social and more human-like appearance. If you notice, these robots, they tend to have a head, a face, some basic facial features, at least, perhaps a body. And this is quite important if we think about robots having to engage in successful interaction with humans by providing some social support. If we think about the need to establish successful cooperative interaction, though, appearance is not enough. It's important, but we need to be able to program new capabilities in robots so that they can interact with us in more natural manners. And I list here some of the challenges that now we encounter in building robots that are capable of natural interaction. And some of these are what I've been working on in the past and even now. So first of all, robots need to be aware that they are interacting with a human. They need to be able to understand something about what is happening, about whether they are expressing their feelings in a certain way, using speech or facial expressions. And they need to be able to somewhat use this information, integrate in a meaningful manner to adapt to them in a way that is contingent to the interaction. So we talk about adaptive robots and to some extent even personalized robots. It may be necessary that these robots may need to become personalized to their users. And last but not least, social learning is an important challenge. So these robots nowadays, they need to learn how to interact socially with humans by interacting with them. So why is this important? We already started to see a lot of questions that emerge from the study of social robots. And one main motivation is to push the boundaries of the state of the art and build new technical advances in artificial intelligence. That's good, but we can use this to build robots that can help us. So, on one hand, bringing together the technical advances with an idea of what we have in mind for a potential application where robot will help us in a social way. There's more, and there's another question which is important if we think about robots that surround us more and more in more new roles. And it's the study of how humans interact with robots. Do we accept them? How is our interaction different if we compare it to a human-human interaction? And finally, but not less important, we can use social robots to understand a little bit about ourselves. So research on social robots can be used to try to answer questions that are perhaps too difficult to answer using methods from more traditional disciplines. And now I'm going to start to give an overview about my work on affective and social human-robot interaction. And when I talk about affective and social human interaction, I have in mind two main components. On one hand, social behavior, and on the other hand, emotion, and how this can build into an interaction between human and robot in a way that is resemble in some ways the way humans interact. I will present two main research strands. One is about development of computational models for affective and social behaviors. And another one is the perception of robot in social human-robot interactions. So on one hand, how to model affective and social behaviors in human-robot interaction, and then how humans perceive this, why they interact with robots. So we start with the first strand, and to guide you through some of this work, I chose an exemplar application. One of the new applications where robots can play an important social role is robot-supported learning. Robots which act as educational agents for children, for example, but also as instructor in a factory. Educational agents which promote learning of users, and by understanding what are the difficulties, what are the challenges that learners face in the learning process, and adapting to these by providing social support. We talk about personalized adaptation, so we have robots which adapt in a contingent way to a specific learning scenario in this case, and user. And we're going to see now some examples of this robot. The first case study is called My Friend, and this is a game companion for young children that teaches children how to play chess. And it's a collaboration with Yolanda Leite, who is here today, and in the framework of a European-funded project called LIREC, which ended a few years ago. So what are the capabilities of this robot? It's a pet-like robot which looks like a cat. It's a robot produced by Philips. And the robot, during this chess game scenario, knows at all times what's happening during the game. However, we think that that's really not enough to capture the experience that the child is going through during the learning process. So what we did was to build a system that allowed the robot to automatically recognize children's emotions during gameplay, and using machine learning-based techniques, but also computer vision to track kids' facial expressions, and also using information about the game to come up with an estimate of their state. So the robot, when children are experiencing negative feeling, decides to become a bit more supportive, a bit more empathic. So what we're trying to do is we build an affective loop where emotion and empathy play an important role. Again, we can think of a robot playing a dual role here. On one hand, it teaches kids how to play chess and provide social support, but on the other hand, it acts as a learner in the sense that it learns through interaction with children what are the best strategies to promote learning and to promote a positive experience for a very specific child. Second study, still in the area of robot-supported learning, involves the use of robots as tutors for students in the classroom. So robots here are used as a new tool that teachers can use to create new learning scenarios. And I'm going to present some of the work that was done in another European-funded project, EMOTE, which I coordinated and which ended only a few months ago. So here the robot is quite different from the previous one. It's a torso-only version of the Now robot from SoftBank Robotics. And this robot interacts with children by means of a large multi-touch table, which is where the activities, the learning activities are taking place. And we have robots interacting with the single learners or with multiple learners, with groups, teaching different kinds of geography-related topics. And here you can just get an overview of all the components and all the modules that need to be considered when building a tutor of this kind. The main message is that we have a large number of sensors which we use to collect information from the environment, from the learners. And then we have several modules which build a model of the learner and can inform the decision that the tutor will make. So is it necessary to provide some support? Is it necessary to propose an activity which is more or less challenging depending on how well the learner is doing, whether the learner is frustrated or engaged or is going through some hard time? So we tested these tutors in schools in 3 different countries, including Sweden. And so what we found, we ran studies for a very short period of time, but also in the longer term for several weeks. we find that when we try to embed empathy as a key component in these tutors were perceived as being more empathic. But we also observed learning goals being met in the long-term evaluations. But perhaps you can get a better idea by looking at this video and seeing how these tutors work in practice.
We are developing an empathic robot tutor with capabilities that allow it to engage in empathic interactions. To enable a robot to respond empathically, we need to model, interpret and respond to the learner's affective state with appropriate expressive behaviour and pedagogical actions to the current situation. This requires a new channel for expressive behaviour using facial, gesture and posture recognition, supporting empathy in the learning context and increasing the learner's engagement. The robot assists the learner in completing tasks with a range of pedagogical actions. For instance, if the learner is frustrated and having difficulty with a task, the tutor will present the answer, explain it and move on.
The symbol is located somewhere over here.
So we're now taking further some of this work, and we're still working at the Social Robotics Lab in the area of instructional robots, not only in schools, but more in general for potentially many other applications. And we're trying to explore open challenges in this area. For example, one of them is the need to develop methods for robots that learn from users that are not expert. So no roboticists, no computer scientists. And this requires advances in machine learning together with advances in human-robot interaction and human-robot interaction design. This is something we are trying to do. We have two national Swedish-funded projects on this topic. One of them was mentioned earlier by Danica. So we'll hear more about some of this work in the future. So now I'll move on to a different strand, which concerns people's perception of robots in social human interaction. And this is some of the works that we started recently. I'm going to talk a little bit about Uncanny Valley, which we discussed also briefly in the previous presentation. So some of you may be already familiar with it. The Uncanny Valley effect was initially introduced by Masahiro Mori in 1970. And so the idea being that as we increase the human likeness of a robot, people's affinity or feeling of familiarity towards them increases, but only up to a certain point. At some point, something happens that there is a sudden decrease in this level of affinity. And this happens when if we increase the human likeness of robots without them being able to achieve a lifelike behavior, then we observe very negative reactions from people. So going from empathy to total revulsion. So this is just a very brief introduction, but here I'd like to discuss some of the questions which we are interested in and what are the motivations. So far, a lot of the work in the area of Uncanny Valley research has been focusing on appearance, not so much on behaviors. There are exceptions, but a lot of the work has been on appearance. And a lot of previous work focused on virtual characters, on still images of robots. And there's still a need to move beyond and look at real robots that interact with humans, not only in short encounters, but in longer-term interaction. So what we like to do is to investigate synergies between appearance and behaviors using multiple embodiments and moving from first impressions, short-term interaction to the long-term, and seeing whether, if at all, perception of uncanniness changes or not. And this is some work which we started with my PhD student, Mike Petzel, who is also here today. So how did we start addressing these issues? We thought of using a mixed embodiment robot, a Furhat robot by Furhat Robotics. I see many people from Furhat Robotics here today too. So Ferhat has a robotic head and also a 3D back projected face. So the advantages are that here we can look both at a 2D and 3D embodiment. We can alter very easily facial expressions in the virtual face, but also act on the facial appearance, both by looking at the face textures, but also the shape of this 3D mask which is being used. So we can do a lot of things which would be more difficult to do if we were to work with the real physical robot. One of the directions that we started to investigate concerned the relationship between uncanny valley and gender. What we found in some initial experiments is that experience of uncanny feelings is triggered more by an incongruence of gender cues rather than a specific gender. So we do find that when people find it hard to assign the gender to the robot, that's when the perception of uncanniness is higher. Another question which we have started to investigate is the link between mimicry and uncanniness. So is there a relationship between perceived uncanniness and the ability to consciously mimic a mixed embodiment robot? So even here we work with Ferhat, and we had a 2D and a 3D version of it, and we had the robot generate different stimuli, and we decided to focus on laughter, an important multimodal social signal. So we had Ferhat express a joyful laughter and the Schadenfreude laughter. So joyful laughter is clearly a very positive type of laughter. Schadenfreude is more of a mixed emotion and can be defined as a pleasure derived from the misfortune of others. So two different types of laughters. So what we found is that the Schadenfreude laughter was perceived as being more uncanny and also more difficult to mimic from the users. We also observed a correlation between the ability to mimic a robot and the perceived uncanniness. But enough with my words, and we can look at a video which summarizes our initial work. So this is an initial study which we conduct and want to continue with this work and move in, as I mentioned earlier, towards the study of long-term interactions and how uncanniness has been perceived there. So this, I'm getting near the end, and I just want to conclude with some final remarks. I showed in this talk several dimensions of what we call social human-robot interactions, and different ways we can involve humans in a human-robot interaction loop. So by contributing to these different dimensions, we can obtain different objectives. On one hand, we can try to build robots that can help humans, not only in a physical but also a social way. But we can also start to understand how humans interact with robots and with each other. But also, we can start addressing some of the important questions, some of the questions that are difficult to answer using methods from other disciplines, such as this one. So what does it mean to be human? And we go back to the initial introduction. And this really requires an interdisciplinary approach, so advances in AI, but also on social scientists and working together to learn about how we function as humans. And I like to end with this picture from film Blade Runner, which I think captures quite well this question. And finally, thanks to a lot of people who contributed to this work in the Social Robotics Lab, in the MODE project, and in many other projects. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And we open the floor for questions. Olof?
Yeah, connecting to the theme of this event, we have seen different sorts of robots, from this very toy-like iCat to the now robots, the fur hat robots, to the very human-like robots that Professor Ishiguro have been presenting. Does it matter how human-like the robots are, and when does it matter how human-like they are for different applications, education, healthcare, and so on?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, social and human-like appearances is very important if we think about robots, which will need to interact successfully with human in a social interaction. But you're right, there are very different appearances. Some are more human-like, and of course they do matter. But sometimes it's very interesting to look at ways to use very minimal embodiment, which allow for the modulation of very minimal facial features to understand how we can best make use of this minimal embodiment in a specific context. For example, we found that in the MODE project, for example, that I presented earlier, and the embodied tutor, kids like quite a lot the Now robot. And now it does have a body, it has arms, there is a head, there are eyes, which are important, but there's not much more that can be done. So then you start to look at other ways of using the body that in a way that can be engaging. And still at the same time being attractive for a specific category of users. So age is often quite important, as you mentioned, the application. So this is quite an interesting question that we ask ourselves when we go and study how these robots will be perceived by users, will they be accepted in a certain social role in a specific context.
Do you know, is there any, I mean, that might be further along in the technological track, but is there any impact of personality on these, on both the presence aspect that we were talking about earlier, but also in the acceptance of these robots? So can you imbue these somehow with a typical response or some sort of pattern that indicates personality, and how does that impact the acceptance of these robots and the sense of having a presence, or of it actually being animated, maybe, which could be an interesting and likeness? Yeah.
Well, absolutely, and definitely there are many different factors that may influence acceptance, not only acceptance, but also how people interact with these robots. And we've seen earlier, we talked about culture and how in different cultures we have certain expectations about robots. Personalities is something else that we take very much into account. We can look also at user preferences, so something that goes even beyond the the personality. So that's why it's important to start to consider whether in some application we may need to build robots that are personalized to a specific user, a specific category of users. So this is some of the work which we started. So take into account as much as possible information about who are the users the robot is interacting with. For example, personality.
We will
just a quick. So, what are ways that personality is being sort of introduced into these tests?
Well,
personality of a robot, not of the.
Typically, in our work, I mentioned that we try to build a human-robot interaction loop, and that always involves building some form of user model. So the robot will know something about the user. It will know at different times how well the user is doing in a certain task, what are the emotions that are being experienced through the task, what are the preferences in terms of task, or what is their personality. So this is something that could be included in a model of the user. That's one possibility. But of course, as you say, there are many other different ways. If we think about personality and cultures, this will have a major effect in how people express themselves and how they interact with robots. And if we think about the need to build a system that help robots to interpret people's behavior, that's something that should be taken into account. So definitely, it's a key area. In this kind of research.
Let us thank Ginevra once again.
Thank you.
We'll need to round off because we are very close to 7. And for those that would like to read a little bit about situations that can happen when we are exposed to the technology that hasn't been designed with a lot of thought. I don't know if you have read about an article about how Amazon Echo is making kids rude. So a couple of you are nodding. So Amazon Echo, or systems that are currently being developed for dialogue-based interaction, are designed to take in very specific commands. So it's not about having lots of, let's say, rich language or using long sentences, but really being very clear and using pretty short sentences when interacting with this type of personal assistants. And so you don't say please, you don't say thank you, nothing of those very polite words that you would use in a regular human-human interaction. So what people in US or these researchers that looked into this realized was that kids that are interacting very much with personal assistants have a tendency to have conversations like that in their daily life with their teachers, with their peers, and so on. So that was very important for the Amazon, who then looked into, and some companies that then built new types of applications on top of the Amazon ecosystem in order to force the kids to engage in a polite dialogue or a polite conversation. So they, for example, the Amazon ecosystem wouldn't put on a movie until the kid says thank you or please. So actively working, and then they could monitor over days the change in behavioral patterns, and then if the kids were doing well, or the learning curve, the gradient was high, they could actually get reward for that. So 5 or 10 minutes extra watching TV or playing games and so on. So it is very much about looking into the behavioral patterns, and I think this is one part of one type of a system that one could use, and do precisely as we do with as parents, right? Giving rewards to the kids when they are doing well, and maybe not punishing them, but looking into ways of how to get them to through positive reward do better and learn, let's say in this case, a good way of interacting and being polite. But it's an interesting study, and I think that studies like that are going to shed some of the light of how to develop then future systems that are also not changing too much of the behavioral patterns that we as humans are used to use. So thank you again for attending today's talk, and we hope to in the future organize something similar on some of the related topics. Thank you.